Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the YouTube channel grecochess, where we discuss and present the various aspects of the game of chess. I'm your host, my name is Karelas Aniziris, and in this video I'm going to show to you what happened at the first round of the most recent chessanity tournament that took place at Jericho, Long Island. First of all, the announcement. Let me share the screen with you. And here we are. First of all, the location, the playing room, it's here, the cafeteria of the school. Thanks to the organizers, they make sure that the sets, the boards, the pieces, the clocks all have been set correctly before the game starts, so the players don't need to worry about them. Makes the life of the players so much easier. Next door is the gymnasium where the guests and the players during the breaks can have some fun. The trophies for the lowest categories and the various sections. The top section is under the 2000, followed by under 1200, under 800, under 400, and there are some unrated development sections. Since my rating was way above 1200, I participated in the under 2000. 3 rounds, as you see here, time control is 3 rounds, meaning every player was expected to play 3 games. G45, D5, meaning when the game started, players get 45 minutes on their clocks. And when it was their time to move, for the first 5 seconds, the clock would not move, the delay seconds, and then it would continue going downwards, and players were expected to complete all their moves before time went to 0, otherwise they would be timed out. My opponent for round number 1 was Bradley Chou. His rating is 1454, his regular rating. Compare this with mine, that was 1556, so my rating was 112 points above his, and I was the favorite. But let's see what actually happened in the game. Bradley had the white pieces, I had the black, and what I'm going to do here, as I usually do, this is the analysis board of the online platform chess.com, and I'm going to copy the moves from the score sheet and enter them one by one, and computer is going to, of course, we're going to see on the left side what is the position after every move, and on the right side the analysis, meaning the computer will evaluate. If it gives a positive number, white is doing better. Negative means that black is doing better. It will show which move would have been the best and what are the top 5 moves for the other player whose turn is to come. And Bradley with the white pieces starts with the most popular move, pawn to e4. The king's pawn opening, you see here. And they reply with a pawn to e6, my usual French defense. Why French defense? It's not the only response, but I'm mostly familiar with that. And when I have white, I hate it, or at least I hated in the past when black played French. So why not play it as black? Next moves, the standard theory, pawn to d4 for white, pawn to d5 for black, control the center. And then white has quite a few options. The knight can go to c3 or d2, or maybe the pawn can go to e5, the advanced variation, or maybe the pawn on e4 can take on d5, the exchange variation, among the options for white. White decides, Bradley sends his knight to d2, and I decide to take the pawn on e4. Knight takes on e4, and I develop my knight from b8 to c6. Until here, you see, until the previous move, we had what are called book moves, meaning we were following the opening theory. And these moves, standards, have been extensively discussed in the opening literature, chess opening literature. But my next move deviates. At some point, of course, one of the players has to leave the opening theory. Knight goes to c6. Good, says the computer, would rather have the knight go to d7. I wanted to exert pressure on the pawn d4, my thought behind that. And Bradley and forced the d4 by pushing his pawn to c3. My bishop goes to e7 and develops the dark-colored bishop. Computer doesn't like it. Inaccuracies as a computer would rather have my queen go to d5 and threaten the knight on e4. And after the first five moves after my inaccuracy, Bradley is leading by 1.09. Let's see how game continues. Knight goes to f3 for Bradley, and my other knight goes to f6. Bradley sends his bishop on d3 to support the knight on e4, otherwise it will be lost. And I don't like the fact that I have two white knights that can access the square g5 and exert pressure on my defenses. That's why I want to prevent it. Pawn goes to h6. King side castling for Bradley. And my other bishop goes to d7. Rook to e1 for Bradley. It is, first of all, the e file is semi-open, and then it is opposite my king. So I need to do something, otherwise, before I know it, I may have to face an issue with the white rook attacking my king. I'm going to take the knight on e4, and Bradley takes it back. Now time for me for king side castling. And at this point, we completed the first 10 moves, and Bradley is ahead by 1.46. Let's see how game continues. Bradley takes my knight on c6. Inaccuracies as a computer, so his advantage becomes much less to about a third of what was before, and I'm going to take it back with my knight. My knight on c6 is on the long diagonal, the diagonal h1 to a8. If you can put your bishops on long diagonal, that is great. Knight to e5 for Bradley, that is hoping to take my bishop on c6 and by doing so double my pawns. Not only that, I'll have isolated double pawns on the c file. If Bradley could play a second move in a row, he takes my bishop on c6, I take the b7 pawn, and my pawns c6 and c7 are very weak. I'm not going to allow it. Of course, my queen goes to d5. And I have a 1 out of a million chance that he may not see the checkmate on g2 because I'm one move away from checkmating. But I wasn't expecting to be so lucky. He takes my bishop on c6. I take it back with my queen, and by doing so, I avoid doubling the pawns of the c file. His bishop goes to f4. He develops the other bishop, the dark-colored bishop. And I want to block it because currently the pawn c7 is defended only by my queen at c6. I don't want to have a queen just to defend a poor pawn. And rook is now on d6. And at this point, we completed the first 15 moves, and believe I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I need to delete this move because I took back on d6, but I was thinking, should I take back with the queen or with the pawn? And finally, I thought, well, I was tempted to take with the queen. It's better with the pawn, even though the computer thinks the other way around. You see, queen is the best move, with pawn the second, because I wanted to have my pawn in the central d file, and I wanted my queen to stay in the long diagonal. So finally, take the pawn. And we completed the first 15 moves. And at this point, what is the score? Here it says that Bradley has an advantage of 0.11. Had I taken the queen out, have an advantage of 0.12. And Bradley wants to continue the attack. Now rook goes to e3. And I knew what it had in plan. If rook goes to g3, queen can take on h6, taking advantage of the pin. And really, I'll be in big danger. But he needs to have a few moves in a row to do it. I'll try to stop it. Queen goes to b5. First of all, I'm threatening the pawn at b2. Also, if queen goes, a queen cannot go to h5 as he planned. He can go to g4, but then I can put my queen on g5. But first, Bradley thought, let's defend the b2 pawn and let's send it to b3. The problem with this move, this is the best as a computer, but this will show much many moves later, is that the c3 pawn is backward. Currently, I mean, if it's post, okay, but currently there are no pawns on the b or the d file that can support it. My rook goes to c8 to attack the pawn on c3. It accepts pressure. Currently, there is a rook on e3 that defends it. The rook goes to g3, and you see here, if he can put his queen on g4, he threatens with checkmate on g7. I'm not going to allow it. My queen goes to f5. His queen goes to d3. And now, this is inaccuracy as a computer. What is going to happen? Of course, if I do nothing, he can double my pawns on the f5 in exchange on f5. But he can also put his queen on e3 and threaten the pawn on h6. And I saw that his queen suddenly approaching my king side is quite dangerous. So I decided to do what the computer thinks the best move. I changed on d3. And now you see here, instead of Bradley having a strong attack along the g file or towards my king, now he has the weak pawn on c3 that he needs his rook to defend it. But before I defend it, I want to control more space in the center, and I push my pawn to d5. I have created a wonderful pawn chain f7, e6, d5. But my long-term plan is to exert pressure on the backward pawn c3, if possible, to win it and go to an ending with the pawn ahead. This was my long-term thought, but it's a long way until then. Let's see what's happening. After the first 20 moves, now I have an advantage of 0.08. Next move. We're approaching the ending, and as the theory says, in the ending, activate your king, and Bradley sends his king to f1. And I want to exert pressure on the c3 pawn. Rook goes to c6. Rook goes to c1 for Bradley to defend an advance. It was already defended, but he wants a second defense because he knows what I'm going to do. I'm going to place my rook on c8. And you see what is happening? The pawn on c3 is attacked by my two rooks twice, c8 and c6, defended by the white rook c1 and d3. If I can have my pawn from b7 go to b4, then the pressure will be enormous. That is why the computer thought it better push the pawn before that to b5. Have the first out of the two steps that I need. Bradley decides to, as I say, have counterplay on the king side. Pawn goes to f4. Hopefully for him, if he can have his pawns from f2, the fgh pawns go to the center, perhaps past the center, he can exert some pressure here. Computer doesn't like it because computer thought that my best move is pawn to b5, and that's why he should have placed his pawn on a4 to stop the b5. But by doing so, he would have weakened his b3 pawn. He would have two weak pawns, b3, c3. Now, one move later, I push the pawn to b5. Apparently, knows what's happening because if he allows me to push my pawn to b4, first of all, cannot be taken because the pin he loses hero on c1. It's attacked three times by pawn b4, rook c8, rook c6, defended only by two rook c1, d3. The king is too far away at f1 to provide more defense. If he pushes it to c4, once again, I have more attacks than his defense. I'm going to win. The pawn at c4 now. Not only that, the next pawn at d4 will become isolated pawn and very weak. So what does he try to do? If he pushes his pawn to b4, he stops it, but then his square c4 becomes a wonderful outpost for my rooks. Instead, he decides to push his pawn to a3. And I'm going to attack along the a file now. My pawn goes to a5. And now, if he does nothing after we exchange on b4, he loses his c3 pawn. That is why he pushes his pawn to b4. And I'm going to take it. And we completed the first 25 moves, and now, due to the weakness on c3, I have an advantage of 1.23. But this is a long-term advantage, a positional advantage, which means I have to be extremely accurate to win the pawn, and after I win it, to have very accurate to win the game. Because you may reach the ending a pawn ahead, but if the opponent has fewer pawns but promotes one of them, they are winning in spite of you having more pawns. Continue now, and Bradley would take back at before. We have the same material. And I'm trying to see how I can win the pawn on c3, or maybe if my rook can win the b4 and take advantage of the pin. What do I do now? Rook goes to a8. Also to take advantage of the open a file. Computer thinks it's inaccuracy, my advantage falls to half. Now, Bradley is free to move his rook from d3 to d2 because the c3 pawn is attacked only once. And now I'm sending my rook to a3. I'm attacking twice a pawn, defended only once now. That's why he places his rook on c2. And this is a battle about the pawn on c3. If I win it, it's not only I have one more pawn, but the pawns b4 and d4 become isolated and very, very weak. And plus, of course, the pawn on c3 was supporting the pawns on b4 and d4. Without the pawn on c3, his position becomes very bad. But he has to be very careful to win it. He can counterattack with the FGH pawns. His king can come nearby. A lot of things can happen. His king could advance perhaps even to e5 and exert a lot of pressure there. Let's see how things will go. I send my king to f8. He centralizes his king. I'm going to centralize my king. His king goes to f2. My king goes to e7. His king goes to f3. And my king goes to f6. Ideally, what I'd like to have is him unable to push any of his pawns FGH in. No, he doesn't have it. The FGH pawns, if he's unable to move them, or they'll be captured, then he'll have to move his rooks and I win the c3 pawn. That was the thought in my mind, but this is many, many moves ahead. After the first 30 moves, I still have an advantage 1.08. But let's see how game goes, because this advantage by itself is not necessarily winning the game. It gives you a nice position, gives you the better chances, but that's all. And all my hopes rest on the c3 backward pawn, isolated backward pawn. It's not exactly isolated, it has pawns on neighboring B and D files, but they are above it, so they're not of too much help. Now Bradley wants to start counterplay along the king side. Pawn goes to d4. And I want to stop. I don't want any crazy games on the king side. The pawn goes to g6. His computer would rather have me go to g5 and exchange. If the pawn's fgh would disappear, my position would become great. You would have no counterplay. His pawn goes to h4. Bradley continues trying to see what he can do along the FGH files on the king side. And now I'm sending my rook to c4. And because his king is on f3, I'm threatening the pawns on b4 and d4. Inaccuracies as a computer, but the thought I had in my mind is I'm threatening the b4, d4 pawns because there is a pin. The pawn at c3 is pinned because of the king being on f3. Next move. Bradley doesn't have too many options. He must have his king leave the third rank to avoid the pin. As the computer says, his best move was to have the king go to e2, because what he did is he placed his king on e3, and by doing so, he saved his pawn on d4. I cannot take it, the king will take back my rook. But the other pawn is free for me, it's free for grabs. Mistakes as the computer, yes, because of the pin, and now I'm winning the b4 pawn. And finally, from the beginning of the game, I'm ahead. I'm ahead by 1 pawn. Great moves as a computer. For me, that was too obvious as a move. Finally, I win a pawn, not the c3 pawn as I was hoping, but the b4. I wish I had won the c3 pawn because this also protects the d4 pawn. Now the d4 pawn is protected by c3. But what can you do? As I say, you don't look a gifted horse in the mouth, which means if you get a wonderful gift, it may not be the best gift you wanted, but if you get it for free, why not? So I have this extra pawn on b4. And the question is how to convert it to a win. It's not obvious at all that this will win. I don't have any passed pawns yet. Material other than this pawn is the same. And if I'm not careful, I could easily, for example, even lose a rook if I'm not careful. Pins, they happen when you least expect them. For example, if his king goes to the second rank and I forget that the pin gave me the pawn and I leave my rook on before, I lose it. Bradley decides to push along the king side, pawn to g5, I take it, and he takes to the f-pawn. And now where would my king go? It could go to f5, to e7, or to g7. I decide to keep it to g7 because I don't want somehow the h-pawn to be able to bypass my defenses and get promoted. That could happen if I'm not careful. Go to f5, then if the king would come nearby, there could be a chance, although very, very remote, I would say, but especially if my king would leave this place here to go and attack the pawns here, there could theoretically be a series of moves that could lend to the promotion of the h-pawn. It's an outside pawn, and better have the king nearby to stop even this theoretical possibility. We completed the first 35 moves, and now I have an advantage 3.01. It is important because it's not only positional, I have the extra pawn. But as I mentioned before, no guarantee this can win me the game. I have to be very, very careful all the way until the end. Now the king goes to 4. He pushes his king towards the center and towards my position. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to lose my rook on b4. If I play any move with the other rook or with any of my pawns, there is no pin and I lost my rook on b4. Of course, my rook goes to b3. I was very alert because I knew that this could very easily happen. Mistakes as a computer would rather have it on c4. Now my pawn on b5, believe it or not, is an isolated pawn. No pawns A and C files. So Bradley could make it a target, and if he wins my b5 pawn, then the game basically starts from scratch. King goes d5. So Bradley wants to use this thing as an attacking force, and that's what you should do towards the ending. My rook goes to a6, provides some additional support to the e6 pawn. Definitely, I don't want Bradley to win my e6 pawn and then the d5, and then the game changes when you least expect it. Completely will change. His king goes to f4, and now we're playing a little bit cat and mouse game. I'm trying to win the c3 pawn. Going to put my rook on c6. For a few moments, we'll play cat and mouse with the c3 pawn because I have two rooks to support it. Bradley has two rooks to defend it. I'm trying to see what can I do. Can my b pawn go to b4 and win it? No, because now since the rooks are on c1 and c2, there is no pin any longer. So I'm trying to see how can I win the pawn at c3. It's a very weak pawn, but this does not guarantee I can easily win it. Bradley will send his king to e5. He played this move, king f4, e5, back and forth a few times, trying to stall and keep the game as it is, and hoping that I might do a mistake in the meantime and something may come to him out of nowhere. My rook goes to a3. I also do the same thing. Of course, on the one side, I want to protect the pawn at b5. On the other side, the a file is an open file, no pawns there, and rooks love open files. King to f4 once again for Bradley. And my rook goes to c4. And we continue the first 40 moves. The computer says I have an advantage of 3.55, but it's not obvious at all how I can continue and win the game. Of course, I'm the one that has the initiative. I'm the one that's attacking, but Bradley could defend if he's very careful and if I'm not careful. Let's continue the game. His king will go once again to e5. And my rook will go to a6. His rook goes to b takes his computer. His rook goes to b2 and attacks my pawn on b5. If he can take it back, then things become very good for him. But instead, I'm sending my rook to b6. His rook goes to b4. My rook goes to c6. He, and he takes my rook on c4. Computer thinks that this is a great move. Well, I sacrificed my pawn on b5 to win the pawn on c3. Now the pawn on d3 becomes extremely weak. If that's what he wanted, I would be glad to do it. And now, how does the game continue? He's going to take my rook on c4. And I'm going to use my rook to take on c4. His king goes to f4. And now my pawn goes to b4. If you look at it, what's happening is that now that there's only one rook, there's once again the pin. The pawn on c3 is pinned. I'm not sure how it can be saved. The king is too far away to grab it. But Bradley, instead of being down by 2 pawns, had another idea that basically made him win back a pawn. said after moves 45, my advantage, look at that, is 5.32. Because now, after one pair of rook is gone, it is becoming more obvious how I can win the game. I'm going to win the pawn on c3, and then while his king will try to get one of the 2 pawns back, then I can have my pawn on actually my king on g7, the pawns on the king side, pushing and winning Bradley's G and H pawns. Let's see how this is going to happen. At least this is a general plan. First of all, he sends his king to e3 to protect, to add protection to d4, and crucial protection, especially if c3 is lost, the d4 pawn is not protected. And what should they do? Two ideas. Either take it to the b pawn and have this pawn, a pass pawn, very near the promotion, or I can take the rook and exchange rooks. Then Bradley will be forced to exchange the rooks with me. And then I have a pawn ending with 2 extra pawns, but one of them ready to be lost. I don't know what to do. I decided let's go to the ending. By the way, time-wise, I was spending a lot of time while Bradley had spent a very small part of his time. So I didn't want the game to continue for too long because then I would be in time trouble. That's one more reason I decided to take the pawn on c3 with my rook. I had to take it one with the other, clearly. He takes it with his rook, otherwise he loses the rook. I take it with my pawn, and I'm 2 squares away from promotion. But if you know the theory, this is the square, and the white king is inside the square. So my pawn cannot be promoted, but can distract the white king in the meantime, because the white king cannot help in the king side, otherwise pawn promotes. Next move. King goes to d3. For Bradley, he's going to win my pawn. Now, which is the best way to do it? Should I start playing on the king side and let him take the pawn, or push it one more move to c2 and have he take it on c2, and then his king is further from mine? I decided to have him waste the move taking the pawn, and I start the attack on the king side. Pawn goes to f6. Here you have to be very careful. Of course, I wanted to liquidate his G and H pawns. Now I'm liquidating at least one of the two, whether he takes on f6 or I take first on g5. I don't want any nasty surprise on the king side just when I'm so far ahead. And believe me, with pawn endings, you may have nasty surprise. You may be ahead by 1 or 2 pawns, but the opponent is somehow able out of nowhere to promote their pawn and wins a game. One needs to be cautious until the very end. He takes my pawn on c3. He had to take it eventually, because now his king is free to participate in the game. Now that he got rid of the c3 pawn, it is far away, but who knows. And now I decide to move my pawn to e5. Now it's time for me to start attacking with my 4 pawns versus 3 of Bradley, and hopefully promote one of them. His king goes to d3 now to be near the game. Of course, he could have changed, if he wanted, he could exchange on e5, but then with pawns on d5 and d5, his king would not have an easy access, and I could use this as a pair of passed pawns to make promotion much simpler. My next move is pawn goes to e4 with a check. At this point, after the 50 moves, my advantage is 9.47. It's very important. It's more than a queen. A queen is 9 points. This is 9.47. And I have what is called a protected passed pawn, the pawn on e4. Not only it is passed, meaning no pawns on the D and F file can stop it, but it's protected by the pawn on d5, even though this for the time being is not a passed pawn. So what this means is Bradley needs to keep his king on the rectangle I'm going to show now. The rectangle that goes from b4 to h4, because otherwise the pawn promotes. I don't need any other support from any other pawn or the king. So he is already constrained. If his king somehow would end up in any square of the fifth rank, my pawn promotes. Continue. His king goes to e3 to block my pawn. What else can he do? And I decide, let's start liquidating the pawns. I take the pawn on g5, he takes on g5. So his chances of a counterplay to promote one of his pawns is very limited. He has the pawn on g5. It is blocked by my pawn on g6, so he would first have to win the pawn. But how can he win it? If he sends his king to win it, even let's assume that I put my king at the most ridiculous square a1 and his king would somehow take it, then the e4 pawn promotes. So the chances for a surprise to lose it are very small, but still I need to win it. I don't want to end up with a draw. And I had cases where I had a better pawn structure, but my king had no way to pass. My king goes to f7 to participate in the game, now that I'm more or less safe with the g5 pawn. His king goes to f5, and still I cannot push my pawn. Still, he's in the rectangle. I cannot push the pawn to e3, I can still grab it. But there's something I want to show to you. The evaluation now, instead of being a number, it says M29. What does M29 mean? It means that if I play the best way, in 29 moves at most, I'm checkmating. Of course, the computer can see all these things. Myself, I couldn't think anything like that. But I knew that the game was mine and I had to be very careless and very unlucky to lose it. Of course, time-wise, I had less than 10 minutes. My opponent had more than 20 minutes, so I had to be careful with my time. I definitely don't want to reach a situation where I have seconds to go or uh, rely mostly on my 5-second delay. My king goes to e6. I want to centralize my king. I'm not afraid of his king grabbing my g6 pawn. His king goes to g4. Still, he's in the rectangle. And now, I start pushing the pawn to e3. You may be wondering, why do I do it? Because he's going to get my pawn. Yes, but while he's getting my pawn, I can win his pawn. That is the thought behind that. And he needs to go back to f3, otherwise the pawn promotes. And while he does so, my king goes to f5 to grab the g5 pawn. I could have taken also the... No. So now, no, I could not. What's happening is that we completed the first 55 moves and the score is N22, meaning if I play the best way in 22 moves, at most I'm mating. And he's going to take my pawn on e3, but I'm going to take his pawn on g5. You see here, my pawn on g6 is not just a passed pawn, but the king is near it, so the king can support it all the way. This was not the case with my e-pawn. Yes, he had the support of d5, but king was nowhere near it. King goes to f3. King knows that for the time being, he doesn't have to worry about the d5 pawn support blocked by the d4, but my g6 is very dangerous, even though it is almost at the starting point. And my king goes to 5. Now, from pawn endings theory, I have what is called the opposition, meaning even if I didn't have the pawn on d5, if the d pawns would disappear, I would win. Because his king needs to go either to e3 or g3, and I'm going to place my king on e4 or g4. In fact, if his king goes to e3, my king goes to g4, or if his king goes to g3, my king goes to e4. This even without the D pawns. With the D pawns, things are much easier because I can win one of the D pawns and make promotion even easier. Let's see how game continues. His king goes to E3, and yes, my king goes to G4. His king goes now to E2. And my king goes to G3. I want to make sure that he doesn't by any chance cover the G1 square. But even if he does, at least I can go and grab the other pawn. His king goes to E3, and now my pawn goes to G5. At this point, we completed the first 60 moves. I have M16, meaning if I play the best possible way, I have made in 16 moves at most. But will I? Will it be stalemate when I least expect it? Who knows? Definitely, it's almost impossible to lose a game. His king goes to E2, my king goes to F4, his king goes to D3, and my king goes to F3. 62 moves. I have M14, but most important, other than how many moves I need for mate, is that my pawn from G5 cannot stop. In 4 moves, it promotes. Let's see. Let's see what would happen theoretically if you push his king on D2, pawn to G4, king to. No, if you push his king on D2, you have to be careful not to continuously push the pawn because his king may reach G1. I don't want that, even though in this case I'm winning because of the D pawns. But if he goes to D2, I'm going to put my king on F2. And now that I'm controlling G1, only now I'm going to push. That is what I would have done, but in this case, Bradley resigned. And Bradley, he played a very nice game. That's what can I say. And the whole game was decided on one pinned pawn. I was able to win a pawn because of a pin and convert my advance. That was the whole game. In fact, for quite some time at the beginning, he had the advantage. So Bradley, you did quite well. And let's look now at the review. What did the computer think about this game? Review. Here is the button, clicking review. 85.4 for Bradley, 90.8 for me. And yes, Bradley played as if his rating was 2300. Wonderful. I played as if I was 2450. Chess.com, thanks for the flattery. Not that I need it. But let's give a look at the various categories. No brilliant moves. I had one great move, and I think it is when I got this pinned pawn, but this was quite obvious. Best moves. 30 for me, 28 for Bradley. Excellent, 15 for me, 12 for Bradley. Good, 8 for Bradley, 5 for me. Book, 4 for Bradley, 3 for me. Inaccuracies, 7 for Bradley, 5 for me. Mistakes, 2 for Bradley, 3 for me. And 1 blunder for Bradley. This concludes round number 1. I started with a win. Nice beginning yesterday. There were 2 more games that were played later that I'm going to show you in the next videos. But now let's see what is happening at the online tournaments I'm following. The grecochess, when I'm organizing, I'm managing. Nothing is changing. We are near the end of the first round. 3 out of the 4 groups, the results have been the results are complete. Group 2, Barak 7 from Israel. Group 3, myself, the Hari from Greece. And Group 4, my skin from Italy, have advanced the final round. And Group 1, Maxim Kovorukha will wait a few more hours to see if Hunting Achievements is going to play or not. Let's see how much time remains. 22 hours for Hunting Achievements. Maxim Kovorukha has 4 wins in 4 games, and Hunting Achievement needs to come back to the board and play a fantastic 6 games to get the points that he needs to advance. Let's see how things are going at the other tournament, the Underwater Moonlights. The Nine Moons tournament, here we are. The first round is almost near the end. 66 games remaining. The news are not good for me, but we'll go to this later. Let's see what's happening in the 9 groups. In many groups, we know who advances. Group 1, it is Lotus Time Chess from Japan and Oli Kimbo from Australia. Third place between Marco 1409 from Germany and Cano 1972 from the United States. Group 2. Spider 99 from Egypt has advanced at least as a third, and the other positions will be between Luciano Chano from Argentina, yes, Junlei 123 from China, and Abdul Basit Kwarizada from Afghanistan. He has not played a lot of games. If he happens to win all of them, he reaches 15 points. Group 3. Maxim Govorukha, that also participates in the grecochess tournament. He's ahead with 12 points, and he has advanced, and so has in fact, Maxim Govorukha is completely flawless, 12 wins in 12 games. He has advanced 12 points, and so has VNK Arvanans from the United States. I'm sorry, that is Malaysia. It's not the United States. The flags are very similar. From Malaysia. I'm sorry for the mistake. I've done it in the previous games. These two have already advanced. And the third place is between Silvio 888 from Croatia, Zanilo from Italy, the organizer of this tournament and also a subscriber of my channel, and RMV 9287 from Mexico with 10 points. And also Ray Dukel from, let's make sure it's the United States this time. Yes, the United States with 6 points have some small chance to reach 10 points and advance. Group 4. Heraklion is leading 13 points in 13 games, but too many games remain. But I think he can advance at least as a third. Group 5. TH everything's over. 1 game remains that cannot change anything. Chinan Fu from Greenland, AMMMT from Indonesia, and Peon Perez from Palestine have advanced. Group 6, all games have been completed. That's why you see in this pinkish color, Mathis B 2008 from France, David 8x8x8x8 from Brazil, and Muncha 44 from Croatia have advanced. Group 7. Here, everything has been completed. A few games remain, but nothing can change. General F66 from Uzbekistan, Mebius from Nigeria, and Tragis from Brazil have advanced. Group 8. My group, where I'm out. I'm 6th. Yes, and that's my final position. I can only be passed by any of the others. Khaled Khattab from Egypt, and Eliezer MSTL from Cuba have advanced. And the third place is between Guguship Original European Union, Altotemni from the Netherlands, and Mars 404 from Kenya. The last group, number 9. A lot games remain, nothing is sure. But Pichu 74 from Italy and Joe Jake from South Korea are leading with 10 points. Well, that's for now. Thanks for watching, to the viewers, the subscribers, to the likes, to the encouraging comments. Next video is going to be round number 2. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Thanks for being with us. I'm Harilas Aniziris. This is Greco Chess. Goodbye.